Okay, so we're in the Imitation of Christ. In my book, we're on page 32, which is chapter 13 on resisting temptation. And we got halfway through I guess we'll call it verse 3, and heading into verse 4. And he's just talking about exactly that, resisting temptation, which in Vedanta speak, that's kind of watching your ego, guarding your egoism, trying to discern. Uh, Egoism is when we have an attachment to a thought, which means we call a thought our own, or we think that it's my thinking. This is my idea, my thought. That's attachment, because it's just an idea and a thought. It's not necessarily yours, because in your true nature, you are all minds and all bodies. And so in resisting temptation, we're just really trying to allow the universal nature, our universal self, our true self, manifest through us without being distorted by the lens of ego through our attachments to body mind. So we have an act of love that gets inspired by our nature. It comes up, it hits the mind and ego, and it narrows that universal act of love into an act that benefits what we're attached to. It benefits our body or our mind at the expense of others. And so that's where selfishness comes from. And so what we're trying to do is remove that prism of attachment so that that impetus for love, when it comes up and goes through the glass of the mind, it'll be more like a window pane as opposed to a prism that kind of scatters and distorts our original act of universal love. And so the more, oh, here comes Greg, sorry. Let me let him in here. How do you? All right. It says he's not on the list. Anybody see Greg?
No.
Not
Okay.
on the screen.
All right. It said Greg has joined your thing and now he's not there. Okay. Well, I'll try and keep my eyes on the screen here so I don't miss him. All right. So many try to fly away from temptations. We try to run away, try to avoid them, only to fall more deeply into them. For you cannot win a battle by mere flight. It is only by patience and humility that you will be strengthened against the enemy. It's through fighting. Through fighting, the way to fight a temptation is through discernment. It's not to push against it. It's not to repress it, or to try and keep it out of your mind. The best way to fight a temptation is to grab it and freeze it in front of your mind's eye and discern. Take a look at it. Say, well, where is this coming from? First of all, is it coming from the body or the mind? One of the two. When you've determined which one, you remind yourself, I'm not the body, so this in actuality has nothing to do with me. I'm not the mind, so this has nothing to do with me. And then you also just remind yourself that whatever it's a temptation for is temporary, that it's not going to last, whatever it is. And then you try and remember the last time that you indulged in that temptation. You look at the whole picture of what it did for you. Was it worth the price? If it gave you what you wanted, do you see that all it has done is brought you back to do it again? And so if you do it again this time, that's just going to deepen the habits that the next time it arises, it'll be harder to say no, and you'll do it again. And if you take a look at that, you see that that is slavery. You see that that is bondage, that the more you give into your desires, the less you're going to be able to control them. And you're going to be in a loop of constant distraction, chasing after desires that do not give what they promise, that do not last, and actually cause you suffering in the long run. And so all of this becomes apparent by paying attention. It's not that you're not allowed to do those things. It's not that those things are wrong in some inherent way. It's just that they're unhelpful to you. They cause you pain. And the only reason that God, as it were, doesn't want you to do them is because the pain it inflicts on you. It's like a child. When you grab the knife out of his hand, he'll cry, "No, I want the knife. I want the knife." And he just thinks you're trying to deny him the knife, not understanding the dangers inherent in having a knife in your hand and running around. And so we are also like those toddlers. And so our favorite little attachments come up. And if you attack it by saying, "Oh, God says, don't do this. I'm not allowed to do this." Oh boy, you're never going to win a fight like that. that's not going to do it. At some point, you're going to hate God and take your knife and run. You have to suss out the reality, because that's all we're looking for. We're looking for truth. If there really was something in the world that really was enjoyable in a lasting way that would benefit you and make you a better person, God would be all about it. You know, he'd say, "Yes, run, go, get it, quick, quick." But if it's something that hurts you and something in the long run that distorts your expression of love so that it's not equanimous, not genuine, and not available to everyone, then it's not helpful to you in the long run. It's going to make you unhappy. So this humility, this patience and humility, patience just means, just that. You don't get worked up over it. You look at it very matter of factly. You fight. If you do happen to lose, bummer for you. The long run, that's your pain. It's going to hurt you. But you don't get too bothered by it, and you certainly don't own it and define yourself by it. Say, "Oh God, I'm a loser. Oh God, I can't control myself." If you start making stories up like that, then you're really stuck. So patience means patient. It takes time, and you will win. Ultimately, you will overcome. And the humility is what's caused by winning. Why? Because when you win, you've reduced ego, because it's ego that desires. It's ego that feels lack and therefore needs something to prop it up constantly. And so through humility, which is letting go of egoism, we become stronger. Humility is strength. Those who only shun them outwardly and do not pull them out by the roots will make no progress, for temptations will soon return to harass them, and they will be in a worse state. It is only gradually, with patience and endurance and with God's grace, that you will overcome temptations sooner than by your own efforts and anxieties. Right? So those who only shun them outwardly, that's an important thing. You're gonna initially, you like your vices. Initially they're sort of like sweet little fuzzy things that distract you from the pain of your the pain of your life. There's something that just kind of take you off into another place, that because you haven't learned to find that in an earnest or in an authentic way through your relationship with your nature, with God within. And because you haven't found that refuge yet, or have not tried it or tested it or come to rely on it, you'll take refuge in your vices. That's why you're compelled toward them, because they take your mind off of the unanswerables, those parts of life that are rather stressful, but we've lived with them since birth, so we've learned to just completely put them out of the way. It's this fear that comes from our smallness through ego, comes through our identification with body and mind. We're not infinite. We are subject to all of the whims and wiles of the universe around us, and that's a stress on us. And add that to all the stuff that we are aware of, our job and our friends and all the unknowns out there. So we turn to our vices as a refuge. We go drinking. It's fun perhaps, but you're doing it because it removes the mind from its troubles. It gives you a chance to not look at the things that are facts in your life and to go on. But through discernment, you realize that those things create bigger problems in your life, and they never create a solution. All they do is give you a period of dead time or downtime, to get away from them. But when you sober up or when you come home from the play or whatever, you're right back where you were. Nothing has changed. Your circumstances are the same. And so through discernment, through paying attention, we come to know this, and we slowly move away from them, not almost naturally. If it's done right, it's very natural, that it just simply diminishes over time. It is only gradually, and again, with patience and with endurance, the whole time resisting any, if you fail a million times, and there are some of us that have had vices and temptations that we have failed a million times, every time they come up, we're like, no, okay, guess I lost again. And that's not a healthy state. That's not a helpful state. But it's important that you don't identify with it. Even though you have failed 1,000 times, you should not own that as yourself. Oh, I'm a failure. Oh, I can never win. Oh, I've never been able to beat this temptation. I'm just gonna give in. Don't identify with it like that, as if it's a feature of yours. You are defined by what's in the moment. And in the moment, you are ever free, ever pure, ever blissful. All strength is yours. And so that's where we get our identity from. Our identity comes from the image of God that is within us. That's why we are, by default, inherently beautiful, inherently loving, inherently forgiving, inherently compassionate, inherently wise. This is what we're trying to allow to manifest by removing our wrong ideas, by educating ourselves out of our bad habits through discernment, through paying attention. When you are tempted, seek the advice of a wise counselor, and do not yourself be harsh with persons who are tempted. We've read this already.
Yes.
Where did we leave off? I had a mark there for that. I'm sorry. I'm doing this way too often. Well,
Whatever it was beautiful though. It was like very good meditation for some time. It was beautiful.
yeah. No, it's good. Well, we'll keep going, unless somebody knows where we let off, because I can't seem to. I think it's pretty close to where we let off. The beginning of all evil temptations is inconstancy of mind and insufficient trust in God. Right? Inconstancy, lack of strength in mind, meanings your no's don't mean no. And that's important. You should have a unified front. You should say no to things. That's why one of Jesus's big teachings, he says, let your no be no and your yes be yes. Don't flutter. If you're and Ramakrishna, very big on that. Remember that one night that Ramakrishna had said that he would go and return something to a neighbor, and it got to be real late, and he was going to bed and remembered that he had told that neighbor he was going to come to visit. And because he had said it, he made himself get up and in the dark make his way to the neighbor's house. When he got to his neighbor's house, he stuck his foot over the threshold of the door of the neighbor's house and just touched his toe to the inside of his neighbor's house, and then went home, because he was a man of integrity. And since he had said he would go to his neighbor's house, he went to his neighbor's house and stuck his foot in the door, to live up to it. And so it's not so much that, that's a funny thing, actually. But nonetheless, you see the level of integrity that he demanded of himself. If he said something, he was going to do something, he would do it. And if he said he wasn't going to do something, he wouldn't do it. And it is of utmost importance that we get into that habit, because that's how you develop self-control. If you are not true to your word, then even you will not obey your word. And that's what he means. That's inconstancy of mind, which means you've trained your mind to be lazy. So if it says no, it doesn't really necessarily mean no. So if you're thinking lustful thoughts and you say stop it, you don't really stop it. or you control it down to a certain level, but you tolerate a bit of something around the edges. If you do that, you've got an infection. That's why you have to take your antibiotics. You have to take the whole series. You can't just take 3 or 4 and be like, oh, I feel better, I'm going to quit taking them now. Because what happens? You haven't cleared your system of the infection. You've cleared it enough to feel good about it or feel good, but then the infection reestablishes itself and then it becomes resistant to the drug. And so know that, learn from that. If you are not a person of integrity within, that will continue to diminish your ability to control yourself. It'll also turn you into a flake, and you won't be reliable. But more importantly, you won't be able to say no to things. You won't be able to find the strength to be what you need to be and to do what you need to do. And so, he's very, very, very straightforward about that. And an insufficient trust in God. I think that comes down to thinking that you really do want this vice. God has said, don't do it. And you're like, no, but I really like to do it. I think this will really be fun. And so you don't have a sufficient faith or a sufficient trust in the scripture to believe that that thing really isn't going to give you what you want. And so you're going to have to go and learn it on your own. And that can be very painful, to learn it on your own. It's fine to do that, but it's better if you can learn from the scripture and save yourself the suffering of having to go out and try it and learn it on your own. Because in that going out and trying to learn it on your own, you may run up against something that you haven't prepared yourself to defeat. You may get yourself in trouble. You may find an addiction. You may find a situation that catches you. So you have to be careful. So the beginning of all evil temptation is inconstancy of mind and insufficient trust in God. Just as a ship without a rudder is tossed about in every storm, so those who are negligent and abandon their good resolutions are tempted in diverse ways. Gold is tried by fire, and the upright person by temptation. Often we do not know what we can do until temptation shows us what we are. So it's through that. It's like going to the gym. You go and you lift up weights. Why? I've never figured out. But you go and you lift up these weights and you do things that are difficult for you, and you get strengthened from them. And so temptation is the same way. If you go and you continually get beat by your temptation, you're going to learn, because you're not going to be happy. But that's why you need to start discerning, because sometimes we don't realize that we're not happy. Sometimes we don't realize that this has gotten hold of us and that we've lost some dignity, or we've lost some, character. That might take us a while to realize that we've gotten lost. That's the danger of a relative world, right? You can go as deep into any of your vices as you want. I've seen that. I've experienced that. There's no end to the depth of your vices. If you go into them, you get hungrier and hungrier and hungrier, and the things that you like become more and more particular. So they become harder and harder to find. I remember, I'm just sharing some of these things from my old days. You want to be a beautiful person so that you can enjoy, your social interactions. And so you think, oh, I'll go to the gym and then I can attract anyone that I want. Right. But then you don't realize that you go work out at the gym and suddenly you're not wanting just anybody who's attracted to you anymore. Now you're wanting people who go and work their bodies out at the gym, and you only want those kinds of people, And so as you run into the world, you become a connoisseur of what you need or what you're desiring. And your desires get harder and harder and harder to fulfill, and more demanding. That's why Vivekananda says the end of all desire is exhaustion. You'll just go until you can't do it anymore. You'll drink until you're laying in a gutter, in last week's clothing. There is no end to them. You will never get enough. That's why the Upanishads tell you that the eye will never get enough of seeing, and the ear will never be filled by hearing. And so this is why we have to discern and know that as the self, the world cannot even touch us and therefore cannot give us anything. Right? That's how he says here that temptations will show us what we are. In the end, you'll realize you were everything you needed when you started, and that nothing that you've done in life has added to you at all. Nothing has given anything to you. You know? In the early stages of temptation, it is necessary to be watchful. And we talked about this last time we read this, that watchfulness is because you want to catch these temptations when they're sparks of thought, before they've actually become a thought and then a cluster of memories and then a state of mind. If you wait until they gather that kind of strength, they're very difficult to overcome. It's very difficult to overcome. But if you're watchful, you can see that first impetus arise, and then it can be just smudged out with a thumb. You'll just look at it and be like, oh no, I'm not interested in that. That didn't, if it gave me something the last time, I wouldn't be here wanting more. I'm an eternal being. I'm not a temporal being. So I need something that fills forever. Right? That's why Vivekananda or Ramakrishna always says, and Jesus says that too, that woman at the well, he says, if you had asked, I would have given you the water of life, where you would have taken a drink and never had to drink again. And Ramakrishna, the woman who had an abusive husband who was a drunk, he told her, tell your husband to come here. And she said, oh, he'll never come. He says, well, tell him if he comes here, I'll give him a drink that will intoxicate him forever. He'll never have to have another one. And so this is what spiritual life is. It's the things that the symbols of your vice are promising you, your spiritual practice can actually give you. The world can only give you a symbol of what you want. That's why it's never quite fulfilling. It's never quite enough. But only within can you find the actual of what you're looking for. So in the early stages of temptation, it is necessary to be watchful, for it is easier to overcome the enemy if he is not allowed to enter into your mind. Exactly right. But is resisted and shut out as soon as he knocks. As someone has said, resist the beginning, the cure applied afterward is too late. All right. So let me do the muting here. This is how temptation is. First, we have a thought, followed by a strong imagining, right? So the spark comes up into the mind. The image comes across the screen of the mind. You attach to it and say, that's my thought. I want that, right? And then strong imaginings means when you've grabbed it and said, I want it, the memories of the other times that you've done, the memories come up of and only the memories of the pleasurable part, the happy part of it, won't be the memories of the morning after, the memories of what it's done to your life. It'll just be those friendly little things, followed by strong imaginings. And then you'll imagine what it's going to be like this time. And of course, in that, it's always going to be the imagining of an ideal. Oh my gosh, this is going to be an amazing, how can I say no to this? This is everything that I wanted. First, we have a thought, followed by strong imaginings, and then the pleasure and evil emotions. It becomes a state of mind, right? That's what we talked about. So the first is the spark of the thought. The second is attaching into it so that it stays in the mind. The third is it brings up memories. The fourth is it brings up imaginings or fantasies about that, of what it's going to be like. And then then you've got a full state of mind going, which means you almost can't control it. You've become that desire. And then finally, consent. Finally, you give up. Now, here's a secret. It's not a pleasant secret. If you have to fight your temptation, you've already lost. The only reason you're fighting your temptation is to fight long enough to feel good about losing. I kid you not. This is how the mind works. And after you've put up a valiant effort, Then you give in. Ah, well, I put up a good fight. I tried. Next time I won't do it. Right? That kind of thinking. But in the fact of, in the mind of a disciple, in the mind of a seeker, your no is no. There's not two people in you. So if that thought arises and you attach to it, and then you say no, it goes away. And it will go away if your no has always meant no to you. If you're wishy-washy, it won't go away. It'll pull back for a second, but it'll come back again because it knows there's a chance. You know there's a chance, right? And so if you have to actually go into battle, it's time for some serious discernment, because who are you battling? There's only you in there. If you said no, who's coming back? Right? And so that's how we have to have our no's no. That's why we have to have our no's be no and our yeses yes. So that at that first part, when you make that decision no, you know that it means no. And so your habit is broken. But then if you go into battling, then you have to watch very carefully. If the battling is sincere, you'll say no. When you realize that you're battling, you'll say no. And you hold on to it. And you're being a person of integrity, it stands. And you don't back down from it. Temptations differ with different people. Some are greatly tempted in the first stages of turning to God, and some have it in their latter days, while still others have it all their lives. And there are also those who are only lightly tempted. I think a lot of this is projection on this guy's part, because life is life. We've all got egos, and the egos are, in different states of training for sure. So based on how aware you've been of your spiritual practice in your life will determine a lot of how successful you are in resisting egoism and resisting this call of the body and mind to be dominant. But it is all part of God's plan for us. That's the important thing to remember. God allows these things because it leads us to truth. Even the pain that we suffer from losing leads us to truth. That pain will ultimately become part of our discernment. We'll remember, oh God, the last time I did that, I swore I would never do it again. So why on earth would I ever be sitting here considering doing it again? Right? And so it's part of God's plan in the sense that he's exercising our spiritual muscle, allowing us to approach him, right? And breaking our bad habits. So little by little, turning us into divine light. For it is all part of God's plan for us, whose wisdom and justice knows each person's state and orders all things rightly for the salvation of that person, right? So God allows this pain to happen. God allows you to do the things you think you want to do and allows you to feel the suffering of it, to slowly wipe away that ignorance, to slowly educate you, because each time you're going to have to be like, why do I keep doing that? How many times do I have to do this before I learn, before I understand? And so ultimately that pain pushes far enough into the mind that it becomes aware of, this isn't the way I should be going. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do it again. We should not be discouraged when tempted, but turn in fervent prayer to God, right? So that means fill the mind with your nature. Remember who you are. I am the divine image of God. I am God herself, a reflection of God. That's my nature. And to act according to that is what will bring me happiness. And so your fervent prayer to God, that is what a fervent no is. That's what a sincere no is. A sincere no, that's what repentance means. Repentance means a turning away from. So it's 180 degrees. You turn away from the vices, and all of the vices come through body-mind. So if you do a full 180 turn from body-mind, what are you facing? Your inner nature. You're facing God. You're facing the solitude of the heart. And so you go there to take your refuge. And that's how we take refuge in God alone. Anything that comes into the mind that has an attachment with a desire, when we resist, we turn to God and take refuge. And we take refuge by singing his name, singing his glories, reading the scriptures, meditating, singing a song, writing a poem. Anyway, anything that you can do to keep your mind on God. One of the best things is to go and serve somebody. Just immediately go, and if you're in a big city, you can go make a sandwich and take it out and walk until you find a homeless person to give it to. Or just go out looking for something, some way of serving someone. So we should not be discouraged when tempted, but we should turn in fervent prayer to God, who in his infinite goodness and infinite compassion will help us in all of our needs. That is the nature of love. And we have to get to know God in that way. God is not an ogre who's sitting there, counting the rights and wrongs of everybody, just waiting to push the red button to drop you into some hot oil somewhere or something. God is the God of compassion, and he wants your success. She wants you to win so that you can find your true nature and enjoy that relationship in bliss forever, if that's your desire, or even greater, to become that. St. Paul has said that together with the trial, he will also provide a way out and the strength to bear it. 1 Corinthians 10:13. Now, this is a nice one. This is a nice one and a horrible one. It's a nice one because it says that God always provides you with a way out and gives you enough strength to execute it. So that's a wonderful promise. On the other hand, it's a terrible promise because it means ultimately you're responsible for failing. If you failed, it's because you literally chose not to take the way out. And so this is important. If you are in a sober mind, a mind of discernment, you're not going to make the wrong choice because you know that bliss does not lie in those wrong choices. A moment of pleasure may be there, but it's a moment of pleasure. And afterwards, all of the weird stuff that happens in our minds will come upon you, and there will be suffering. There'll be suffering in that. So, I can't do it is never a true statement. You can win. You must win. It is your nature to win. And ultimately, you will win. So why prolong the suffering? Just win now and suffer no more. Let us humbly submit ourselves to God, because that's the only way you can submit to God, is by pushing the curtain of the ego aside. That's pure humility. You push that curtain of the ego aside, and you will see God. Let us humbly submit ourselves to God in all trials and temptations. If you're sitting in the lap of God, if you've got the name of God singing in your mind, you're paying attention to that beautiful bliss in the presence, what will touch you there? God is a refuge. These things cannot reach that place if you can learn to establish yourself in the presence, in the silent heart of the shrine. When mind is silent, who will deliver the temptation? Right? If the mind is silent, who's going to bring up the memories? If the mind is silent, who's going to make you feel like you need something? Right? So you find the shrine within. Find that bliss, that love, that source, that spring, the size of a thumb, the Upanishad says, hidden in the heart, where the absolute becomes the expression, the manifest. Find that spring and sit there in its refreshing water with the presence of your beloved, and be happy, be content, be full. Let us humbly submit ourselves to God in all trials and temptations, for it is the humble and submissive that he will save and exalt. Psalms 34:19. Through temptations and trials, our scriptural progress is tested, right? Tested in the sense that when you lift a weight, your muscles are tested. which means that they get strengthened because they're just going a little bit beyond their capability, right? You do as many reps as you can until you can't do any more. And that last rep, where you're and finally get it up, that's when the magic happens. The body's like, oh my God, we better strengthen up. Look at this demand on us. We've got to do something. So through temptations and trials, our spiritual progress is tested. Mother's like, oh, look, see, they're doing very well. Let's help them go farther. Let's help them go farther. If we are fervent and devout and unaware of any difficulties, it is no credit to us. But if we endure patiently in the time of temptation or adversity, then our spiritual advancement is apparent, right? So it's with focus that we do these things, with attention. Actually, that's the part of mindfulness, that we really should live a mindful life. That's the best kind of life. And living a mindful life will not allow for a wandering mind. That's why we're living mindfully, to eliminate a wandering mind, to silence a mind of unnecessary thought, unnecessary thinking. And so we pay very close attention to the moment, to everything that's real in this moment, and we stay out of the head and stay present here. And in that subsequent silence of the mind, we will feel that bliss. We'll sense that truth within us. Some people are kept from grave temptations, and yet every day they fall into the same petty faults. God in his merciful goodness permits this to keep them humble, so that they will not trust in themselves, seeing how easily they are daily overcome. Yeah, that's true. But it's a dangerous truth, right? Because you could make an excuse for yourself that will allow you to fail over and over, and you'll justify it by saying, oh, God is just keeping me humble. Right? There's not a real way to verify that. And so it's a dangerous thing to say. So if it's true, let it be true when you meet God, and he'll be like, I was just keeping you humble. Get in here. That's fine. That's the way you want to learn that truth. You don't want to make the assumption of like, oh, God's just keeping me humble, and I want to be really humble, so I'm going to be really adamant about this vice. That's a dangerous, a very human and very dangerous place to go. So don't do it. God in his merciful goodness permits this to keep them humble, so they will not trust in themselves, right? Seeing how easily they are daily overcome. Because this our self that we would trust in is our ego self. The ego self as the doer, you see. And since we know the absolute truth is that we are not the doer, and that the ego has no inherent reality, you're relying on a phantom, right? And you really can't rely on ego, because ego is not so committed to overcoming these things, because ego is composed of memory. Ego is composed of body, mind. And so ego is the source of wanting a lot of these things. So you can't rely on the ego self to overcome the things that it wants, that it's decided it's needing. And so this is why we bring in our ideal, the presence of God. And this is why we trust that and turn to that, instead of building a habit of trusting our ego self to do the right thing. All right, chapter 14 on avoiding hasty judgments. Anyone have any input or questions or ideas on anything so far that we've talked about? Some of it was repetitive, but all of this is helpful.
I really like the way you explain the nature of mind when a form, when a no is not a firm no, how a mind comes back again, waiting that it knows that it's not a firm no. That was beautiful, actually.
Yeah, it does, and it's the danger, you see, because first of all, there's nothing that comes back and tries again. That's our delusion. You see, when you have an attachment, you give it sentience, right? So if a thought comes up, say a lusty thought comes up, it's just another thought like any other thought, and it'll just come up, display, and then disappear if it's not attached to. But when you attach to that thought, it comes up, you attach to it, which means you say, oh, that I made that thought. I produced that thought. That the thought expresses me, right? And I want to have that pleasure. That's attachment. And when you do that to a thought, you share your sentience with that thought. And that thought becomes an independent line of thinking in your mind. What does that mean? That independent line of thinking will return to you, and you will talk to it. And since you've split yourself in two now, you're the person who both doesn't want that vice, and you're the person who does want that vice. And those two people will exist on equal weight within the mind, and they'll fight, which is an absurdity, because there's only one you in there. There's not two people in you. There's one. There's no one to argue with. This is why thinking is such an absurd habit, which is a very odd thing to say in our culture, because everybody thinks that thinking is what we are, that it's wise and smart to think, and smart people think. But see, most of what you know already within. And what are you going to figure out by thinking? Who is it that's thinking, and who is it that's listening? They're the same source, right? We've talked about this. So any line of thinking that you've going on in your head, you're not learning anything from that. You're not. That's not how it happens. You're just entertaining yourself. Thoughts are entertaining. Conversations are entertaining. So we have entertaining conversations and thoughts in our mind. But it's not necessary, because the mind is not going to present something you don't already know, because the mind is sourced in you, and you are sourced in you. So whatever your voice in your head is saying, and the you that's listening, what is there to be accomplished by that? They both are sourced in the same self, the same wisdom, right? And so this knowledge comes from within. It's revealed to us spontaneously from within. It's not a process of thinking. It's a spontaneous manifestation from your nature, which is wisdom, and infinite wisdom. And we know that it's hard to believe this until you have done enough internal dwelling as such. You've spent enough time on the inside of yourself so that you can see these subtleties. That's, it really is true that at a point in spiritual life, Thakur says that in the beginning it's very hard because you have to hoist the sail, right? You have to get all of those preparations. But once that sail is hoisted, you can sit back and enjoy the ride. Well, hoisting that sail is getting to know your internal self, getting to know the workings of the mind, getting it all sorted out so that you know through experience that the mind is not you. You know from experience that the body is not you. And you know from experience that when you withdraw into yourself, that the body and mind disappear for you. You know from experience through the subtle things that begin to manifest. When you pull fully into yourself and out of mind, you understand yourself to be infinite, not as an idea, but as an experiential being. You know that there is no time outside of mind. This is a truth that comes up, and it's not something that you learn by thinking about it. It's something that you know, and you begin to understand that your wisdom is infinite and is available to you spontaneously in the moment as it is needed. You as an ego self do not have to query it. You see, the ego doesn't have access to all of that stuff. The ego has access to mind. And so that's what gives us the experience of, oh, I have to query that. What is that answer? And we sit there and we go through the mind and grab the answer because we've identified in mind. We're camping out in the changing. And so that's where we go for our knowledge and our wisdom. Not a necessary thing. That's Maya. If you come below the veil, come into the heart outside of mind, your wisdom is spontaneously available in the moment as it's needed. It doesn't have to be queried or asked for. It is your nature. And if you can sit in that place, that objective place of silence, you learn all of these things. You can't learn them in the mind. And so this this is the challenge. When you're living in mind, it takes faith that these things exist. When you finally get enough faith to actually execute the abandonment of mind, moving into the heart, then you see the truth of things. But you can't see them through thought. Thought is the veil. The noisy mind is the veil. All right. Watch over yourself and take care not to judge the actions of other people. We gain nothing by criticizing others, but often are mistaken and thereby offend God. But to judge yourself and your own actions is always profitable, right? So discerning what's going on within you is where your focus is. Live in your internal world. Don't worry about anybody else. In truth, those other people are really just thoughts of other people in your mind. And what you see as the other person is only a symbol for another person that's within your own mind. And you can never know anything about that person's state of mind except for what you project from your own mind onto them. And all of this you will see clearly in the silence of your mind. You'll understand all of this very clearly. And so don't criticize others. Why? Because the only reason the ego criticizes is to establish its own self, right? Because we've talked about the nature of ego. The fact that it doesn't exist leaves it continually insecure. So it's always trying to collect evidence of its own existence, of its own greatness, of its own wonder, its own power. And it will do that in any number of ways. Criticizing others is just one of them. Manipulating others is another one. There's infinite ways almost, actually. So, but he says here, spend your time going within. Suss out your own delusions, suss out your own untruths, because once you've purified your own innards, you won't see them in others. Holy Mother is such a clear teacher on that. You cannot see a thief outside of yourself unless a thief exists within yourself, right? A baby sees no thief. You can go into a baby's nursery room and you can take all of his diapers. He's not going to dial 911. You can go in there and take anything you want, and he'll just sit there and kind of squirm around in his crib. He doesn't care because he doesn't have a thief in his mind, right? So know that the best way to find out about your own faults is to think about a person you dislike, and then sit there and write down all of their faults. That list will be a list of your faults, because you can only see faults in others that you have seen within yourself. And so you can use that as a practice if you want. If it'll help humble you to realize it's a wonderful truth, and it's a hard truth to live with, because we like to think ourselves free of the faults that we like to blame others for. You can see this the best way. I always go to pizza, because this is how I see these things. I remember in DC, standing and we had a little island in the kitchen. That's where all the food would sit. And like before lunch, everybody would get in line and go around the table. And I was a junior Swami, so there was usually three or four people in front of me. And, it was just whatever the devotees had brought for lunch. And so one day I noticed there's a pizza there. There's 3 pieces of it because it was leftover. And in front of me are exactly 3 sadhus. And I'm sitting there. I want that piece of pizza. And I'm very nervous that all 3 of those swamis are going to want a piece of pizza, and then I'm going to be left with nothing. So I'm sitting there. I'm watching this happen in my mind. I'm just watching it happen. And, sure enough, that person in front of me takes the last piece of pizza. And I saw my mind want to attack that person for their selfishness. Oh, what a selfish person taking the last piece of pizza like that. But you see, it's because my selfishness of wanting that piece of pizza for me is what made me aware of selfishness. And so I take that then and project it on that person. Look at that selfishness, that person leaving there. Because the right result as the self is a joy. Anytime anybody's desire is being fulfilled, you're happy about it for them. It's like, oh, great. There's that wonderful story of Sri Ramakrishna in the boat. Everybody was really hungry. It was lunchtime. There was no food. So everybody on this steamship was super hungry. They'd been sitting around listening to the master all morning. And somebody gives the master a big bag of candies, of sweets. And it says that the master sat there hungrily eating all of the sweets without sharing them with anybody else on the boat, right? Without anybody there. And the person who was writing about it is telling, how everybody was initially shocked and upset because they expected him to share this bag of treats. But the real wonder of the story is that at the end, the person who wrote it said, but the amazing thing was, when he was finished with the sweets, all of us were full. Nobody was hungry anymore. And see, that was Thakur giving a very profound lesson. We are one. And in the pure mind, we are one. It's not an imagination and it's not a future thing. Even now, we are one. We are only unaware of it. Those of us who don't see that oneness, we're unaware of that oneness. But someone who is aware of that oneness can affect us all, right? So by eating the sweets, he filled all of us up. And so this is a great thing, this idea of non-judgment. It's really recognizing that you are the world you live in. This world is unique to you. The universe of your mind is created uniquely by you. And not all of us share the same one. Every one of us has our own universe within our own mind that we live in. We often judge a thing according to our preference, and therefore our judgment is emotional rather than objective. That's exactly why we try and transcend mind, because the mind is always subjective and relative, and it cannot be objective. Subjective, it cannot be objective. Until mind is silent, we cannot be objective. That's why we cannot see this moment as it is. That's why we don't see God. That's why we don't see divinity, because the mind has named it 1,000 other things and broken it into little pieces. But in the pure mind, you see what it really is. You see that it's God. Vivekananda had that experience in Calcutta. He teased Ramakrishna. He says, so you're telling me all things are divine. So this coffee cup here, and he picks up a coffee cup. So this is God. This coffee cup is God. Is that what you're saying? He starts teasing Ramakrishna about it. And that afternoon, Vivekananda is in his kitchen at his own home, and he has a spiritual experience given to him by the master, in which he sees the divinity of everything. And doggone it, he sees that silly cup on the table is in fact divine. And he had such a deep experience of it. He says that he went out when he was walking on the street, he was banging his head against the iron railings of the fence just to convince himself it was really there, because he could see that everything was divine. So don't judge things according to mind. Don't judge things except in your internal world, what's necessary for you. This stubbornness in our own opinions, can you imagine? This stubbornness in our own opinions would not dominate our judgments if our hearts were set on God. Yeah, it's always good. I'll just jump on that idea of opinions. The fewer opinions you have, the more inner peace you will have. So don't form opinions. Don't form opinions about things that don't require you to form an opinion about it. Just don't do it. Opinions cause suffering. Expectations cause suffering. So if you can free yourself of expectations and free yourself of opinions, you'll have a greater amount of inner peace. It'll be wonderful for you. I remember when Swami wanted to paint the front steps of the monastery in San Francisco. I wanted it dark because I was the one that had to clean them. And if we didn't choose a dark color, I was going to have to be out there every day sweeping and washing them with the hose. And so I put my vote in, my opinion. The steps should be dark. They won't show the dirt. But Swami was like, no, dark is tamasic. I want a light color. It's more sattvic. So we painted those steps a light salmon color, and they were filthy. And I had to clean them constantly. And about a month after we had painted those steps a light salmon color, it's the only time in my life that a Swami has come to me and told me they were wrong. Swami Prabhupada came and he said, you were right about the stairs. No matter how much we clean them, they always look dirty. But I could have saved all of that just by not having an opinion, because the world goes on as it does, regardless of your opinions. Set your heart on God instead, which means find your contentment, find what you want in God. Don't pretend that you want things out here. Things out here are temporary and changing and don't matter. So if somebody paints your room the wrong color, don't sweat it. No big deal. Someone burns your toast, don't sweat it. It's a no big deal, right? Learn to take what comes, find every moment as perfect, see God in it, enjoy his company, her company, that company, and go on. But there is often in us some inward tendency or some outward attraction which carries us along with it. And so these are some samskaras. These are our past experiences, our past habits, our past decisions, the things that we've gone through. Those are the things that create an inward tendency or an outward attraction, right? Those are things. Many are secretly self-seeking and therefore do their own will and not the will of God. Not many, pretty much everybody is self-seeking. Everybody with an ego, anybody who's aware of objects. Let's make it that stark. Anybody who's aware of objects is self-seeking because they are in ego space, and the ego is only concerned about this body-mind, this particular body-mind. To the degree that you efface that ego or minimize it so that you can see past it, to that degree you'll be loving. To that degree you'll be authentic. So many are secretly self-seeking and they do their own will and not the will of God. You do what I want, It's like, well, I'll do that later. Today's my day. Though sometimes they are unaware of it, most of the time, because you have to be unaware, which is ignorance. That's why they call it ignorance. Ignore, hence it means ignoring the right, ignoring the proper thing, ignoring your nature in the moment. So this unawareness and ignorance are the same. Those are synonyms. So you're not being aware of something, you're not paying attention, you're not looking at it. You're being ignorant. You're ignoring it and doing what you want to do. You know that the 9th piece of cake is going to make you sick, but you ignore knowing that and you eat it anyway. That's ignorance. As long as things go their way, they appear to be at peace. But if they meet opposition, they become impatient and depressed. Yes, exactly right. The world is changing, always. If you try to make a fixed point in it that will make you happy, you're a sucker. You've messed up. Let the world be as it is, and you simply be happy because you are divine, because you're immortal and ever free, full of love and full of wisdom. That's why you're happy, not because you got the blue shoes you wanted. Often through diversities of opinion, dissension springs up between friends and neighbors and even among religious and devout persons. An old habit is not easily overcome, and people are reluctant to be led beyond their own views. If you cling more to your own reason or your own will, rather than to humble obedience to Jesus, you will only with difficulty become an enlightened person. For it is the will of God that we be perfectly subject to him, rising above our own reason and our own will by what? By an ardent love. Right? And this is where it's really worth mentioning that this will of God, because I know growing up as a Christian, I used to really resent God's will. It's like, why should I care about your will? I'm the one here. I'm the one doing this, you know? Why should I do that? Because I saw God's will as being something different from my own. But see, the fact of the matter is that my highest will is God's will. That God is the truth of my will, right? That my will and the ego will are two different things. So when we learn that, like your conscience is the higher bird, your conscience is the will of God, as it were, in your mind, right? An enlightened man never argues with his conscience because he knows that he and his conscience are one, that his conscience is his highest ideal. His conscience is his highest will, right? So he'll never argue with that. You and I, the conscience, the conscience, that's God's will. You know, that's the right thing to do. But then we've got our own will that just sits there and argues with the conscience. Oh, that's ridiculous. How can you believe that? I want this. And we go and we take it. All right. Oh gosh, it's 8:09.